I'm chair of my department and have been involved in the assessment in my department ever since I began 9 years ago. And in these 9 years, we developed a new assessment plan, and we had mapped out, so we developed our learning outcomes. We mapped out which courses students would take to make sure they achieved those outcomes. And we tried to design an assessment plan where faculty wouldn't necessarily be adding to their load because we have a small department and assessment becomes a difficult thing to ask for a few people. So we designed the assessment plan so it would tap into natural assignments and sort of capitalize on what we were already doing in the classroom. And then what we saw as we started to assess was that we were only able to assess a few skills and not really content, and there seemed to be a couple of reasons for that. One is that we have a small number of majors, and so we have our content knowledge assessment, and it was hard to get that content knowledge because oftentimes classes would be canceled, and so students weren't actually exposed to that content, so that became difficult to assess what the knowledge that they were learning. We were able to assess oral communication, written communication, things that they get in many courses, but because of the small numbers, it was hard for faculty to feel the data were reliable, and it was hard to take action based on those data. And so it sort of has stalled out at collecting data, but then not really knowing what to do with it because it doesn't feel like it's something that we can act on. And so I think that's kind of where we are when trying to figure out how to move forward from there.
When it comes to things outside of accreditation, everyone gets really excited about, we got through accreditation and, we know that there's data out there, so we just need to start using it to, create new programs or maybe new first-year courses. One of the things that we have done recently is something called Foundations of Excellence, and it required that we evaluate our first-year programs on various levels, from diversity to faculty and staff to the diversity of students, the type of curriculum that was being presented, whether or not they were exposed to real-world topics as opposed to just first-year, college 101 about the institution. And it created this motivation to evaluate all these aspects and make significant change to the first-year experience so that students would be retained. And after the first year, what has happened is just a reduction in motivation, intrinsic motivation, and also faculty buy-in. So faculty absolutely want to either be a big part of it or run the show when it comes to any type of evaluation of their programs or their courses. And the other part is trying to make sure that the outcomes do not reflect badly on their ability to teach. So what ended up happening was just giving it to the faculty, but faculty don't necessarily want there to be any changes because they're doing a lot already. They have heavy loads. So all these wonderful ideas that came with a plan to evaluate and constantly track outcomes in these courses and other aspects of the first year experience kind of stopped just because there's still constant discussion about what should and should not be included. And so the tracking of information and actually having inputs to expect outcomes is the reason why that kind of stalled.
University-wide, we had a Davis grant to start assessment probably 6 years ago, particularly of general education. And I was partly involved in that as the English department chair because we wanted to make sure that the first-year writing program would be part of it. And I was partly involved in it because I was involved in faculty development. And for some years now, I've been the director or on the steering committee of the Faculty Center, which we call CELT, Center for Excellence in Learning, Teaching, Scholarship, and Service. So the general education assessment turns out to be very difficult, I think, and I'm not sure, I'm not as directly involved in it anymore as I was then, but I think it's doing much better now. But I think the problem there is that you have to deal with 20 different departments. And once we had our set of general education goals, every discipline interprets those goals somewhat differently. And it's hard, I think, to figure out what kind of data you really want to get. So I think it got off to a pretty slow start. And I think it's doing better now, because now they've figured out that, what kind of artifacts they want to collect, and who they're going to get to look at the artifacts, and they remember to ask the instructors for the assignment for those various artifacts. But I think general education assessment is very, very difficult. And if you're trying to demonstrate that students who are in your general education program, especially since they all take different courses, other than the required math and the required English, I think it's difficult, and I think that's one place where we stalled for a while. The other place where we stalled, I think, is, as I mentioned, we had a system that was much too labor intensive, and we were basically asking 4 faculty members to spend time in the summer, when most of us are trying to do our own research and writing, reading students' portfolios and putting them into this rubric. So we probably had at least 20 to 25 students' portfolios that we all had to read. We had 6 department goals, and with learning outcomes attached to each of those goals. So I myself found that it would take me 3 or 4 hours to read one student's portfolio and put it into the rubric. And so none of us could really complete it, so it stalled. The other thing I think that we came to understand is we weren't entirely sure that a summative portfolio was the way to go. And we started looking at formative portfolios after that, which don't decrease the intensity of the labor any, but I think that's a question we're still struggling with, is what we want this assessment to do. Do we want it to be summative so that we can say, look, they have learned what we say we're teaching them, or do we want to do it so that we can intervene at key moments for our students and help them to learn better before they get to the capstone course and the end of the major?
I think faculty load is a big thing. Faculty do a lot of work in trying to, if they see assessment as something they have to add on to that work, that can be a very difficult thing. And I guess that kind of ties a little bit to seeing the value in assessment. I think when faculty see how they can use the assessment into their own classroom, I think there's a lot more emphasis on it, or they can tie it into their work better. But yeah, I would say the faculty load and being able to see the value in assessment is probably the biggest hurdles for assessment to move forward.
One of the biggest hurdles to sustaining it is keeping interest in this project, and also reducing the stigma that it's overwhelming and it's stressful. You know, the reason why we're here is to provide a stellar education on multiple levels to students, an opportunity for professional development and experience for faculty and staff. So those are the outcomes. We have specific outcomes. It's not just like reporting retention, graduation, and whether or not they pass the class. But are we providing students an opportunity to gain skills where they'll be successful outside? So what are we doing? What's our plan? That's one of the things that interferes with sustaining it. Too many iterations of evaluation can make it exhausting, and people get tired of doing it, just like taking multiple surveys. And the other part is keeping them aware that there's information available that speaks to whether or not the service you provided students was efficient, whether or not they were successful because of certain skills that you taught, and how are you measuring that they acquired these skills. It's not difficult, but doing, it does become daunting. So I think that's one of the issues, is just keeping interest and motivation and not making it seem like it's the end of the world or an evaluation of their ability to teach.
You have skepticism is a very real thing. There are always going to be faculty who are skeptical about assessment. And some of them are skeptical because they see it as top-down, imposed by administrators. And some of them are skeptical because they either don't understand or really disagree with the need for assessment as opposed to evaluation of students by individual faculty members. So I think the concern that it's a top-down thing really has to be addressed by showing faculty that this is ultimately of benefit to their students and of benefit to them as instructors. And certainly because I've done so much faculty development work over the years, I mean, my pitch would always be, let's just assume that all of us always want to be better instructors. Assessment is actually a way that you can figure out how to be a better instructor so that your students learn more.
I think mostly about our general education assessment. I've been involved in that for about 8 years. And that's been going on for those 8 years. And I think what contributes to how that's sustained is that, in general, I think the faculty, so it's part of committee work. So we have a university-wide committee that is focused on general education, and we have several faculty members from all the disciplines on campus, or many of them, contributing to the work. And so it feels like we're a community of educators. And so I think that allows for the sustainability of that effort. We are all involved in developing or modifying rubrics. We all contribute work, or most of us contribute work to the assessment process. We see the data afterwards. We see how we can act on it. And so it's kind of the ideal of closing the loop, being able to see the data, being able to act on those data, and that adds the value to the assessment work.
One of the things is trying to create a culture of assessment and evaluation at an institution that did not necessarily have one structured and organized and on a regular schedule. Outside of the requirements from NEASC or ABA with site visits and things, 10-year and 5-year evaluations. So one of the things that has sustained since my arrival, which is one of the purpose of me being here, was to create this culture of assessment, is creating these committees that are actually focused on creating rubrics and processes and metrics for evaluation. And we've been very successful. We created three rubrics for our Common Core and established a plan for surveying students on global perspectives, so that we're able to evaluate and have some actual quantifiable and qualifiable data that speaks to outcomes for students in these areas. How do we determine a student has been successful in learning to write appropriately or correctly or within a theme or a thesis, or whether or not they're successful presenting information orally, or can they, critically analyze information given? What are we doing? And then we say, well, how do we determine that they, give them an opportunity to show that they've acquired this skill? Then how do we measure whether what they've shown us is good, bad, or otherwise? So that's actually been a process, and we just completed that kind of a pilot evaluation of some writing samples in June, writing for the writing rubric and for the critical thinking rubric. So these are some of the things that have come to pass in the last 3 years. We've done that well, getting the law school on board. The professional schools are a little bit different because they have ABA learning outcomes that are specific, number 302 A and B. So that's a little bit different than just, can you read, write, or things like that. So But that's been pretty successful, I think.
One thing campus-wide that has helped us is that with our Davis grant, we hired our first director of assessment, and so we had someone who was really guiding the campus-wide project, someone who was a resource, someone who actually worked in the institutional resources office. So I think it was a way of bringing together resources we already had. We now have a really outstanding director of assessment who is very professional, very knowledgeable. I think he's been part of this project, in fact. And one of the very positive things that has happened is that we now have, let's see if I can get all the A's correct, an academic assessment advisory group. And every department on campus sends a faculty member to this group. And that group really has the advantage of talking to our director of assessment, of bringing in information from the departments, spreading information back across campus. And I think that's really helped faculty buy-in. And I know when we work in our department assessment committee, I found it very useful that one of the members of our assessment committee also serves on the campus-wide assessment group. So we can go back and forth and we can say to her, can you check in with Mark, the director, and talk to him about what we're talking about, what's happening on the assessment committee. So I think we have a much better sense that we're all working on this. And the other way I think we've made improvements is we had our NEASC assessment a few years ago, and I was one of the co-chairs of that and the principal editor of our self-study. And what I realized then was that there was no coherence across campus to speak of, and all the information was everywhere that we would need for data collection. And I think we've made really important progress since then by realizing that we need to share data. We need to have a sense that this is a campus-wide project. So I think that has been very stimulating for the campus. I can't speak for other departments really, but my sense is that many other departments are working positively in that direction now.
I think based on some of the general education successes, so I do think being part of a community, I think that's a big part, and having the value added, knowing that your work is being used for something, and so that comes, having administrative support so that they communicate the value of the work that you do, being able to use it for tenure and promotion, those kinds of things. So seeing that it's supported at the administrative level, but then also seeing how you can use it in your classroom. So kind of, both levels of the value of the work.
The initial thing was just getting people to accept that this was something we had to do. The second thing was presenting an example of how to get it done or how it's been done. So bringing in people who talked about assessment evaluation. And then to be forced to do it through accreditation. And then once we got through it, trying to keep them motivated was to immediately jump on, learning outcomes assessment, creating a template so that it was standardized. This is really simple for you to just state what the learning outcomes are, what the inputs are, what papers are being evaluated, who's evaluating them, and make it kind of a step-by-step thing, as opposed to just go do some assessment evaluation of your program and not provide any information. The other part was letting the faculty know that there's a plethora of data available that can, speak to so many different expectations that they have for students. So participation in, performing arts activities is something that maybe and when we say assessment, it's not just program review and things for the departments, it's also for the institution. So student affairs, our students actually being exposed to other ideas and other cultures through various events and opportunities. So that's pretty much what it is. It's been a short period of time, but I think because it's been short, it's been easy not to let it peter out because I'm still here. Constantly encouraging them to, use this information to evaluate what's going on. But it may be a challenge as the university goes through transitions, just keeping the focus on assessment. The other part is just, it's another thing we have to do outside of providing the service to students anyway.
The number one thing is faculty buy-in. And it's fine if you've got administrators supporting you and giving you secretarial help, but I think until faculty really make it part of their teaching practice, it's not going to work. And that's why I think I was so happy when in the English department we had every single member of the department vote positively for our 6 goals and our learning outcomes. And this was already probably 6 or 7 years ago when that happened. And I think we did that by really showing faculty how the kind of data that we were collecting and making available to them was really very helpful. So, for example, we did some curriculum mapping, and we got all of our faculty to come in. We did it, I think, on the day before classes started. We all sat around a big table, and one of our very talented members of the assessment committee had worked out the rubric. And so all the faculty members picked the courses that they were teaching and simply filled in that curriculum map where they addressed the goals and learning objectives in individual courses. And when the very talented person on the assessment committee put this all together, we were all able to see where students were going to be learning skills, abilities that we said that we were teaching them, what courses all that was going to be happening in. So that was useful for all of us to see, I think. And when one positive thing that came out of the portfolio project, which again we shared with all the faculty, and I think that was very helpful in convincing them that we could become better instructors and therefore have students who are learning better, was that we were able to put together that curriculum map where they said they were teaching all these things, and what the assessment committee was seeing on the summative portfolios. And we could see places where we were saying, yes, the students clearly have learned on the whole to do this quite successfully, but here's where they haven't learned. So in that famous assessment phrase of closing the loop, we were able to say to faculty, look, now we see the areas that we need to step up teaching our majors. And we know that our majors take the introductory literary study course, they take 300 level courses, and they take seminar. So those are the areas where we need to step up instruction of specific things.